Hello, welcome to our career webinar, The Changed Landscape of Tech Hiring. Our speaker today is Vishwastam Shukla, the Chief Technology Officer of HackerEarth. And our partner sponsor today is Freshers World. And this should be an excellent session, whether you are looking for new hires for your organization or whether you want to get hired. Before we start, a little bit about how to work the WebEx controls. For questions for Vishy, which we will handle at the end of the webinar session, please use the Q&A box. Remember to address them to all panelists and hit send. You can put information in the chat if you wish. It only gets shown to us and not to everyone in the audience. Use the all panelists setting as well there, or host and presenter, and send, and we'll be able to look at that during the process. But again, we will be collecting the questions to present to Vishy toward the end of the session. We'll also be doing polls, and let's start with one here. And this is basically to get a feeling for who's in our audience today and how everybody's coping with the ongoing work from home situation. Give you about another 20 seconds to answer. And we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here are the results. And as you can see, people tend to have more experience in this audience. So we have a bimodal distribution of people with a lot of experience or people who are still in school. But the nice thing is that 2/3 of you are saying everything is going well today for you. And for the people who did mark thumbs down, we hope that by the end of the session, you'll have some information that will help you feel better. And with that, I'm going to introduce Vishy, who is, as I mentioned, the Chief Technology Officer of HackerEarth. 14 overall years of work experience, including 7 years at Amazon, where he started out as a developer and ended up as a site leader for one of their US locations, and has since spent 7 years leading technology teams at various B2B software as a service startups. So he has a wealth of experience to share with you today, and welcome, Vishy.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Looking forward.
So one question to start us off with is, how have tech jobs changed over the last year?
Over the last year?
Or the last, in the horizon we're looking at the last several years, and then everything changed much faster in the last year.
Yeah, I think if you ask about the nature of jobs, I don't think there's been a lot of change in the nature of jobs itself, right? But if you ask about the number of jobs, I do believe, tech hiring has actually picked up after an initial dip that we saw during the COVID months, right? So I would say last year, February, March, April was pretty tough. But May onwards, when people figured out that, hey, we are going to sort of learn to live with this and we've got to get on with lives, that's when the tech hiring actually picked up quite a bit. In fact, a lot of quote unquote non-digital businesses moved more and more towards digital mediums, right? Whether it was for distribution or for execution or whatever else they wanted to, and that has created a whole lot of new opportunities for software developers, generally speaking, right? So tech hiring has actually picked up. I work for an organization where we are directly dealing in tech hiring for a lot of multinationals, SMBs, and startups, right? And what we've seen is our own, traffic has picked up at least 3 to 4 times, right, of our usual traffic. So that's the kind of impact that we've seen in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 quarters at least.
Okay. What has there been a shift in the tech roles that employers are looking to fill?
Yeah, I would say there's been a constant shift towards organizations looking for deeper technical skills, right? So on the job skills and being hands on with a lot of technologies is something that people actually look for. Organizations initially used to spend a lot of time and energy and resources into training some of these employees after hiring them. I think that trend has seen a change, and now they want people who are actually ready to take up and hit the road running, sort of a thing. So that I think has been a major change that we've observed.
Okay. So has this changed how employers express their job descriptions, their requirements?
Absolutely. So some of that, in fact, is something that I'm going to talk about today as well. But yeah, I think what has started to happen is fundamentally how organizations used to recruit people is undergoing a major change, a major shift. And this change was already kind of underway for last several years. But because of COVID, I think a lot of these things have suddenly fructified in the last 9 months, I would say. So there has been a major change in that aspect as well. Obviously, it may not have impacted everyone so far, but people who have been actively looking for jobs or people who've been actively interviewing, I think all of those people have been touched by these changes.
So qualitatively, does that change the targeting that people should have in terms of what they're looking for, what area of technology they should be looking to enter, or should they look to shift from from one area of development to another, or from being a developer to being a DevOps engineer, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I would say there is no dearth of opportunities in either of these areas that you called out, right? So whether you want to get into DevOps or you want to get into web application development or mobile app development, there's absolutely no dearth of opportunities. In fact, there is a slight dearth in terms of the quality talent that exists there, right? So that is something that we kind of are working towards ourselves at HackerEarth, and I'm sure there are a lot of organizations who are trying to solve this problem. But there's absolutely no dearth of the quality roles that exist for across the industry for any of these skills. So obviously we hear a lot about data science and AI and these things, but to be honest, I mean this is just yet another technology. It isn't necessarily going to replace some of the traditional tech roles as such. So this is just an add-on, is what I would say.
You mentioned HackerEarth addressing the imbalance between supply and demand of qualified people. Can you tell us a little bit more about HackerEarth, what you do, how you advance that cause?
Sure. So at HackerEarth, we have 2 or 3 facets which are externally facing. One is basically a developer community which is more than 5 million strong, a global developer community. This community is typically engaged in a lot of hackathons and a lot of practices that we kind of offer. This is all free of cost. Anybody can come and sign up for a practice session with us. They can practice as many problems as they want to in whatever area they want to. Obviously, it's restricted to software development, and that's what we're going to talk about majorly here, right? So that's one area. Hackathons and challenges are another sort of area where, again, organizations can come and sponsor these hackathons and challenges, or they can basically put forth a challenge or a hackathon, which is to evangelize their own internal technology that they might have built, right? So it could be for any, it could be for a social cause. Recently, we did one in participation with United Nations, right? It was to help the cause of aging, right? And how developers can basically figure out solutions and make the society more inclusive towards aged people, right? So there are various sorts of hackathons and challenges that continue to take place. And then the third aspect is the assessment, which is basically about organizations coming to HackerEarth platform and assessing thousands and thousands of candidates and actually trying to recruit from those, right? So typically people come and they create a test of sorts, and that is a technical test where people, candidates can come and write code, or they can answer some subjective or objective questions. And once they have attempted the test, they have gotten a score for themselves. The organizations then decide to take them further for interviews and so on. So that's the last one.
By the way, on behalf of aged people everywhere, thank you for your initiative for the United Nations.
This was just the most recent example, nothing to do with who I'm talking to right now.
No, I think it's very appropriate. The hackathons and the notion of working on, would we include in that the idea of open source development? That the environment we're talking about?
Yes.
Where people.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
How would you advise people in terms of the benefit of participating in open source development projects and hackathons for getting visibility towards employers and for building up that credibility in your portfolio or your resume?
I'm just going to cover that as part of my presentation. So let's.
Wonderful. Okay, good. And I'm just taking a look at some of the questions that I wanted to ask you. So I think one of the things that we'll discuss in that area relates to this question. So I'll ask the question, but I'll let you answer in the context of your presentation. What steps can candidates take to present themselves in the best light to employers? The flip side of that is the question of how do hiring managers quickly find the right candidates among many applicants and out in the universe where you're at this point competing against many other organizations for talent?
Absolutely. Very, very relevant questions, Stuart. So that is something that I'm going to talk about.
Okay. Well, I think this would be a great time for you to begin that presentation.
Sure. So I'll share my screen if that's okay.
Yeah.
If you could just confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes.
All right, great. So thank you everyone for joining in. I know it's probably late for some of you joining from India, but thanks for sparing time during your evening, and people from rest of the world, if you're joining, thanks for sparing time and listening to me. I hope the information that I'm going to share and my insights and my experience that I'm going to share is going to be very, very helpful for you. But and obviously we are going to keep the Q&A session towards the later part. So keep firing in your questions to Stuart. He'll be moderating those. And with that, I'll quickly jump on. So I don't have a lot of text on the slides per se. So you would probably have to just listen to me and follow the slides as they move along. But not a lot of content on the slides itself. Right. So with that, I'll quickly start. Stuart, I will want you to confirm if you can see my next slide. You can?
I should say yes.
All right, great. So I want to quickly start off, by defining what is skill signaling, right? So typically, when you are in the job market, you kind of, are trying to attract companies and recruiters, and the entire ecosystem has been functioning in a certain manner, right? So traditionally, a lot of this skill signaling, so to say, was being done during your using your resumes, right? So resumes have been the sole carrier of any kind of information related to your skills. Candidates, usually used to dump all sorts of information around their skills, into their resumes. And they do that because recruiters were using these skills to shortlist people based on these resumes and the skills that were present there, right? So it's kind of a feedback loop that had gotten created, and the ecosystem was functioning like that. So whether or not the candidate is confident about their knowledge of certain skills, they used to take this route to optimize their chances of success, right? So sometimes you may know a few languages, but you would kind of increase that list by a two or three more languages, and you'd want to kind of just get your foot into the door in terms of entering the hiring process, right? So that's traditionally how resumes have been used, right? And this obviously not only reduced the conversion rates for candidates, but it also sent out, like I said, feedback signals which were very misleading, right? So that's one traditional way of skill signaling, right? Slowly, as the ecosystem evolved, we all of us started using LinkedIn, right? But there again, except for some cases, like the nature of the information remained pretty much the same, right? Just like you have the information on your resume, it was now available on a website called LinkedIn, right? And I'd agree that using blogs and posts on LinkedIn or having recommendations on LinkedIn was still a better way of actually skill signaling, but anything beyond this was still pretty much the same, presented in a different format, right? Old wine, new bottle, sort of a thing. So, and again, moving on, what are some of the other avenues using which, we used to do skill signaling traditionally, right? It can be done by calling out your educational pedigree, right? So, for instance, somebody says, "Hey, I have a degree from Stanford or MIT," or if you're in India, you could basically claim, "Hey, I have a degree from a tier one college like an IIT or something," right? And hence, I must be better fit than most of the other candidates in the job pool. Well, it used to be a very established way of skill signaling. We will talk about whether it really helps, your cause or not as of today, right? Similarly for work experience, right? So I have personally worked for Amazon, and there are a lot of good companies out there, where people, if they work in those companies, it kind of creates that value on their resumes. But honestly, at best, this is a hit or a miss case for hiring manager when they try to hire based on just this pedigree, right? So again, having a big name on your resume may or may not necessarily skill signal in the right way, that it should be. So all of these things, right? Whether it is resume or LinkedIn, or your educational degrees, or your work experience, all of these, I would say, are not your direct signals for skills. Rather, these are proxies, right? So these are proxies for your actual skills. So I hope you got some sense of what are these proxies that we're talking about. Now let's move on to some of the real skills, that real skill signals, right? So first one that I wanted to cover there is contribution to open source projects, right? And Stuart briefly touched upon this. So I think, if as a candidate, right, imagine having a candidate who's done open source contributions in his life, right? Irrespective of the depth of those contributions, right? Even if you have checked in 4 or 5 lines of code into an open source project, I am assured that as a hiring manager, and trust me when I say this, I've taken thousands and thousands of interviews and assessed them over several years, right? I, as a hiring manager, am assured that you as a candidate actually understand how development with a team and on a team project actually works, right? The candidate must have gone through a process of, getting their PRs reviewed by somebody else, right? Somebody who's probably a better and a senior developer might have given you a critical, high quality code review feedback, for instance, right? All of these are such valuable learnings for any software developer. So if you have any signal like that on your resume, I as a hiring manager would be super duper impressed, right? Similarly, if you have a GitHub profile, like most of the serious developers these days have a GitHub profile, right? Just by looking at your activity on GitHub, the hiring managers can figure out whether the candidate has spent quality time on some of those skills or not, right? Uh, Hiring managers can figure out what are the real skills that you have, what are the exact languages that you know about, or what are the frameworks that you have used in past, right? Similarly, looking at the GitHub timeline of yours, they can actually see how active you have been in recent weeks or recent months. Again, that's a very strong signal towards your actual coding skills, right? Or let's say application development skills. So again, something that really relevant. Um, Again, we were talking about hackathons just a while back. So what if the candidate has regularly participated in hackathons? Now, to me personally, that's a great signal about candidates, ability to actually understand real world problems, right? Uh, their ability to actually apply their technical skills towards solving real world problems, and that's such a big plus, right? Hackathons give you that unique chance to actually delve into something which is completely different in terms of domain, right? So you may or may not necessarily have experience in that domain, but by participating in a hackathon, which could be a 2 3 day event or a week long event, you can learn so much about that specific domain, and test your knowledge and put your knowledge to actual use in that domain, right? And this is all done in a very short span of time. So even if you don't end up winning some of these, the exposure that this kind of exercise gives you, and the highly condensed form of learning that you get would be very useful for your actual job, right? So this again helps engineers build business context, and they may lack this otherwise, right? If you are fresh out of college, you may not have a lot of domain knowledge in any of these real life domains. So again, something very strong as a signal. The last one that I had was activity on coding platforms, right? So I'll make a confession. This is actually one of my favorite signals, right? When I look at the skills and when I'm hiring developers, right? So you can sign up on any of these several online coding platforms. HackerEarth is just one of them, right? There are tons of other platforms which are available to you. You can actually sign up on those. Pick any trail that you want to actually practice on, right? So for instance, we provide data science as a trail, as a learning path. You could pick up any language, and get trained in that. You could pick up from a series of algorithms or data structures to actually learn from, right? Whether it is dynamic programming or sorting or whatever else that you want to actually learn, right? And these coding platforms typically have a very good curation of problems, right? So you don't even have to worry about, what is the next thing that you should be picking up, right? Once you pick up a track, you're pretty much on an autopilot after that, right? And I think even if you solve a single problem in a few days, it will give you such a dopamine hit and an immense confidence, amount of confidence, that you can take up the next one and the next one and the next one, right? Once you build that practice, right? If I'm hiring someone who has mentioned any of these coding platform links on their profiles, that just shouts out loud to me that there is actual real skill over there, right? So again, I am personally very biased towards people who participate on coding platforms and actually, are serious about that. So again, something very strong. So these are, some of the new modes of signaling, right? So to answer Stuart's initial question, like what can candidates do different, right, to get themselves noticed? I think these are some of those different things. So yes, you do need a resume, and you do need a LinkedIn profile. You need all of that. But what is going to make you stand out are some of these, right? If you're participating in open source projects, if you have a very solid GitHub contribution, a profile on GitHub, if you have profiles on active, and activity on coding platforms, if you participate in hackathons, pick up any of these, right? Anything that interests you, and you would be able to basically differentiate yourself vis-a-vis some of the other candidates which are there. So that's how skill signaling has changed over time, right? Moving on, right? So obviously there are a lot of experienced people who have more than 5 years experience on this call, right? So I will try to cover a mix of these skills, which will be relevant for both the entry level as well as for some of the senior folks out here, right? So the first one is basically about problem solving. Now this is one skill which is basically an indicator of aptitude, right? Or roughly translated, it is an indicator of your IQ, right? So can you solve problems by breaking them down, right? Mapping those problems to something that you might have already solved, right? It doesn't mean that you should be solving trick problems or puzzles, right? But something that requires more methodical thinking, something that pushes you to think harder and build a thought process, right? Build your first principles thinking, that kind of thing, right? So what are some of the examples of problems that could be kind of it could come under this umbrella, right? What if you are asked in an interview, right? How many gas stations are there in the US, right? Now that's a very, very open-ended problem. You as a candidate might find it very interesting, but some of the candidates actually get really scared of these problems. The key is not to get scared and get worried about such open-ended problems, because there is no real correct answer here. In most of such cases, let's say the interviewer asks you how many people commute using Delhi Metro every day, right? These are very, very open-ended problems, and I think what the interviewer is primarily looking for in such cases is whether you have the right ability to think through some of these very ambiguous problems, right? And can you actually arrive at a number which is remotely closer to what the real number might be, and then how do you arrive at that, more importantly, right? So your entire thought process is what matters. You may not be able to guess the number of people who commute using the metro every day very accurately, which is fine, right? Doesn't matter. But what is your thought process? How do you arrive at that number is what is the interviewer actually looking for. It could be some of the other real life problems, right? So for instance, one of the classical problems in computer science is optimal stopping problem. I'm not sure how many of you have done a course on algorithms, but let's say in real life, right? If you were to answer this question, right? How many houses should you explore before you finalize something to rent or buy, right? Now that's a very real life problem. If somebody is out there in the market looking to rent a house or to buy a house, you would typically go on and try to find out, uh, what all houses are available and whether you like them or not, and how many should you actually continue to see, and then finally, how do you finalize when to rent and buy, which one to actually finalize, right? Or some people who are actually into dating, right? So how many people do you date before you decide, to marry one of them? Right. So this is again a classical, real world problem, but converted into, an algorithmic problem, and it suddenly becomes an optimal stopping problem. Right. So that's how computer science and algorithms actually are used in real life as well. And it is your ability to actually map some of these real world problems into what you probably would have studied, as part of your algorithm courses. Right. Of course, so all these problems actually require, like I said, first principles thinking, and they challenge you to think out of the box, right? Till the time you are able to think through and you don't get stuck, and you are constantly moving on, it, I think to my mind, you're doing well as a candidate, right? So that's about problem solving and aptitude. The next one that I wanted to talk about was basic data structures and algorithms. Again, very specific to software development role, right? Uh, a lot of developers, by the way, shy away from these, right? Even when they know that this is important, they shy away from these because they think that these are problems that are only meant for books. But in real life, you don't necessarily need this knowledge. Well, let me tell you, with all my experience that I have seen, you could be more mistaken if you think like that, right? A Java developer who can explain to me how an array list class is actually implemented is far, far better than the one who actually just knows how to use that array list class, right? So I'm looking for your solid understanding of what is happening under the hood, so that kind of knowledge is always helpful. To give you, a real life analogy, right? A soldier can pretty much dismantle his rifle and reassemble that rifle in a matter of few seconds. They don't necessarily need to do that in a war zone, but they still practice that. They do that because if ever a situation comes where the rifle got stuck, they would be able to service it quickly and start using it again, right? And that's exactly what these data structures and algorithms do to you, right? So no matter how solid, no matter how often or not how often you actually use these, it is important to have this knowledge, right? And so that you kind of bring out that Swiss Army knife whenever that is actually needed. So knowing your data structures and algorithms it's pretty much like having a toolkit which you can flip out anytime and just use it when the situation demands, right? So again, very, very important skill to have. Uh, the next one is basically about design. Now, this is obviously more relevant to people who have some experience in software development, right? There are typically two types of designs that hiring manager test you for, right? One is a high level design, right? By high level design, what I mean is you should basically have the ability to architect software systems using various moving parts, right? This is what I personally call synthesis, right? So given various parts, let's say I give you a database, I give you a web server, I give you a proxy server, maybe I throw in a cache or a queuing system, right? Can you actually put together all of them and design the system for me, right? That is the architecture that typically hiring managers look for, and it's primarily referred to as high level design, right? So that's one part of the design skill. The second part of the design skill is basically low level design, right? Now this goes squarely back to your knowledge about object oriented principles, if some of you have done those courses, right? So can you correctly identify various entities in a given system, right? Can you convert those entities into maybe classes or maybe database schema with the right relationships between them, right? For example, if you were to design a system to build Simplilearn, right? I'm taking this example so that most of you can connect with this, right? So if you were to design Simplilearn, you would have to identify entities like, a learner or a course or maybe a cohort, right? So these would be different entities. Typically, a relationship would look like, a course has many learners, right? So there is a one-to-many relationship between course and learners, right? So these are the kind of relationships that you would have to identify. And again, all of this is clubbed under low-level design. So people who have done software development for a few years are required to know some of these, skills. I mean, to possess some of these skills as well, right? So that's about design. Now, the last one that I had is actually pretty interesting. Now, when you're hired as an engineer, let's say some of you are actually working as a software developer already, right? What might happen is that not always you actually start, working and coding on blank IDs, right? More often than not, you would start adding code to existing code that which has been written by somebody else. It could be a part of the product, it could be part of some project that is already built out. It might have existed for a few months, a few years maybe, right? But as a new engineer on that team, can you actually read through the code, right? And identify some brittle parts of that code, something that might be poorly designed, right? Or something that is not correctly abstracted out, right? These are what I call as bad code smells, right? Or bad smells, right? When you start adding code to that repository, you are expected to increase the overall code quality and decrease, and basically decrease the cyclomatic or general complexity wherever possible. So if you are looking for jobs as a software developer, make sure you have these skills. Make sure you can actually read code and understand code and make amends in that code wherever possible, right? Uh, how do you do that? Again, I would go back to the initial part of my talk, and I would tell you that, hey, go read some code from an open source library, right? Go explore GitHub. There are tons and tons of interesting projects out there, right? So that's how you do, spot code skills. Okay, so these were some of the skills that were very obviously very specific to software development, because that's the general audience that I'm trying to cater to today. Again, in terms of upskilling, right? I mean, I talked about various skills. Now, some of you might already possess those skills, but for whichever part of all those skills you don't possess, you go out and build those, right, and hone those over a period of time. And remember that it's not a one-time activity that you do when you pick up a language, or you pick up a framework, or you learn a new algorithm, right? It is more about how you can get into a mode of continuous learning, right? How you can continue to invest in yourself. So upskilling is more like your second nature then, right? That's the state you want to be in, right? Quickly wanted to touch upon top down and bottom down learning approaches, right? So top down learning basically means you try to pick up a real world problem and then you basically break it down into smaller problems, right? Find solution for those smaller problems, and then finally you convert it into code or whatever else is your final deliverable, right? So that's your top-down problem. We talked about, let's say, building Simplilearn or something like that, right? So you start with a high-level problem statement and then you try to break it down, right? The bottom-up learning would typically involve you picking up, data structures or learning algorithms, right? Or learning various languages, right? Or related frameworks, and then finally, building applications using those, right? So those become your building blocks. So you kind of pick up the building blocks first and then start to build it out from bottoms up, right? So for instance, you want to build a library management system, right? You will figure out, how to manage records for the books, right? Library users in terms of algorithms you may have to learn, right? So sometimes you might have to apply sorting to arrange books, right? You might have to learn about LRU caching strategy, right? To place the books in the most optimal manner. So this is an example of how you can break down the system into smaller parts and then actually implement it. And there's nothing wrong in picking either of these approaches, right? In fact, most of the time you're doing both. So some of those things you will actually do a top-down approach, while the others you would actually pick up bottoms up. So that's about upskilling. Uh, Moving on now, from this point on, whatever I talk about will be more sort of generic in nature, not necessarily related to your coding and your technical skills, right? So obviously, as a software developer, if you have coding skills, you are great. I mean, at least you have a starting point, right? But what if, I mean, let's say you can code, you write excellent code, you can design, and you have learned your data structures well, etc. But what if you are able to, not able to communicate effectively, right? Uh, Anytime, no matter what organization you work for or you want to work for, right? If you cannot communicate verbally or in writing, uh, I'll be very, very candid, you're not going to get too far professionally, right? That's the bottom line. You have to learn to effectively communicate. Sometimes people think that ability to communicate effectively, is just about using polished English or whatever other language you might be using, right? That's just plain false. Effective communicators, are the ones who know when to talk, what to talk about, and who to talk to, right? That is essentially what effective, communication is all about. So once these guys know the criticality of the situation and they figure these things out, who to talk to and when to and what to talk about, right? Then it's just execution. Then it's just whatever language you are comfortable with you actually use that and get your job done, right? But I cannot overemphasize on this aspect that communication is such a key skill that everyone must possess, right? Here's a challenge for all of you, right? Try finding any good or great leader around yourself who cannot communicate effectively. Just try to do that, and let me know towards the end of the talk if you can figure out somebody. All right. So moving on. This is again something which is very, very, very critical, guys. And whether you are looking for a job, you're already working somewhere, and you have a solid job, doesn't matter, right? Attitude is something that will always kind of shape your life, right? Whether it is professional or personal, right? It will shape your life. Someone wise said this once, right? Talent can open the first two or three doors for you in life, but it's your attitude that actually opens the remaining 97, right? So that's how much attitude actually matters in life. Uh, you guys saw in the introduction that I spent a lot of time at Amazon, and I spent my formative years there as an engineer. And we used to spend so much time practicing and preaching these 12 to 14 leadership principles over there, right? You can find tons of literature online for those, right? But I have picked these three for you, which you can see in the slide, which I found very, very relevant for this audience specifically. And trust me, if you can demonstrate these three traits truly, right, nobody can stop you from reaching wherever you want to in your career, right? It's as important as that. So with that, I'll move on to the first one, which is ownership. Now, the thing with ownership is it is basically about taking charge, right? So do you take complete charge of the things that you are required to work on? Do you act like maybe you own the company, or do you act like CEO of your function, or your basically your area or your component or whatever it is that you are responsible for, right? Um, so do you act like an owner, or do you act as if it's your own business, right? Do you step in for colleagues when you see them slipping, right? Or do you do you step in when you see something slipping through the cracks, right? That's what is ownership essentially, right? It starts from simple things like, if you write code, then do you test your own code, right? Or do you review your own code, right? Or let's say if you're in a non-coding environment, then do you talk to your stakeholders and ensure that everything is as per what they wanted, right? And people with high degree of ownership stand out because we all can simply bank upon them to deliver, right? If you tell me that, hey, this person, this XYZ person has high degree of ownership, I will be able to trust them with what I need them to deliver, right? So these are the people whom you don't have to really follow up with on anything, right? You just give them something and basically consider it done, right? That's what ownership essentially means. Very, very, very important trait for anybody in their professional lives. The second one is, let's say, hunger for excellence, right? Now, this is basically about pushing the bar higher every time, right? So again, I'll give you an example. Let's say when you work out, right, you count your reps, right? Let's say you start with 10 reps, but slowly, you keep building your stamina and you go for 15, then you go for 20, then you go for 30 and 40 and so on, right? So what are you doing? You're essentially pushing yourself and you're pushing the envelope to perform better every time, right? With every single instance, you're actually performing better, and that's exactly the regimen that you need to follow with your work too, right? So let's say if you are a developer and in your 100 lines of code you get 5 comments every time. See how you can reduce that to 1 comment or a 0 comment on your code, right? Similarly, if you write a technical design document which requires a lot of back and forth, see how you can get absolutely uneventful design reviews, right? Similarly, if let's say you are into some business role, let's say you are writing a case study, right? And that case study has to be reviewed by your stakeholders. See how uneventful that review is, right? Can you just smoothly sail through that review and not get any comments, right? And if you get, then how do you improve the next time onwards, right? So that's exactly what hunger for excellence is. And I think some people have a natural knack for pushing themselves, while the others need to nurture this, right? So that's the difference. You have something as your nature versus something that you need to nurture, and both of them are fine till the time you actually realize the importance of this, right? So that's hunger for excellence. um, the last one that I picked out of everything that I have kind of gone through is customer obsession. So again, no matter what organization you work for, whatever role you're applying for or you're already working for, right? uh, Customers will always take the top priority, right? That is the bottom line. So you have to put the customer's needs first and work backwards from there, right? This essentially means that maybe if you are an engineer, you might be pulled off from your planned tasks, right? Or your role could be anything, right? You might have planned your week out, but then suddenly there is a customer need for which you might be pulled out of that planned task, and you might be required to work on something urgent that basically resolves customer pain, and that's absolutely fine, right? This could mean that you pick something which has very tight deadlines, for instance, right? So you might be required to deliver something to a customer in a very short span of time. This is all very, very sort of regular, right? This happens fairly commonly, right? Fairly frequently. So any organization which cares about its customers, and honestly, if you don't care about customers, you cease to be an organization after a point in time, right? So this could mean, let's say if you're a business facing person, or you're into a support role, right? This could mean taking n number of customer calls, right? Doing product demos or explaining them how things work, right? And this could require you to work odd hours. This could require you to work weekends, right? So etch this on your minds, that customer is truly the king or the queen, right? And we all, when we work under the organization, are working to serve them, right? And that's the very reason why any business actually exists, right? So these were the three things that I wanted to kind of touch upon in terms of you know, what should be, constituting your attitude per se, right? So ownership, hunger for excellence, and customer obsession. So I think with that, I have kind of reached my last slide, and this is something that I wanted to talk to hiring managers about. I'm not sure if the people here are into hiring or they are hiring anybody specifically hiring developers, right? So you all know hiring good engineers quickly is very competitive, and it is actually very hard, right? Sometimes you may not have the time to actually hire enough people. Sometimes you might have time, but you may not have the resources to pay good engineers, right? So it's a very hard activity, right? One of the things that I've always advised young hiring managers is that you need to always cast a wider net, right? And you can do that because of technology. If I were to take my own personal example, I used to review tens or maybe hundreds of resumes every month, right? To hire for a few roles. Now if I were to sort of avoid that route, how do I do that, right? Today, there are platforms like HackerEarth which are available where you can go and basically shortlist, from thousands and tens of thousands of candidates who can take a test, and from there you shortlist whoever you want to, basis the performance of those candidates, and then take them forward for interviews, right? So it's as simple as that. In a matter of few hours, you don't even need to look into resumes, right? You just push you design a single test, push it out to maybe 10,000, 20,000. We have had organizations, who have assessed more than 70, 80,000 candidates in a matter of few hours, right? So that's the kind of scale that you can achieve with technology. So cast a wider net and assess as many candidates as you want to, and then obviously take them forward, right? Lastly, objective hiring is the real effective hiring, right? So if your judgment is based on too many subjective signals, it will always be a hit and miss, right? I covered a few such signals during the initial part of the talk, right? Things like pedigree, educational degree, all of those things kind of give you proxy signals. So if you have very objective ways